Our next speaker is, they have that commercial of that beer guy, and they call him the most interesting man alive. And I used to believe that until yesterday. I met Richard Boyd and his beautiful travel companion, Linda, and, got chatting with Richard about artificial intelligence. I struggle enough with my lack of intelligence, so I'm hoping he'll download something into me after this program. But Richard describes himself as a serial entrepreneur. He's a tech consultant, author, speaker. He has created and sold several gaming companies. His current company is Tanjo. Did I say that correct? Which is an artificial intelligence company and machine learning company. He serves in several industries: the health industry, Department of Defense, education, and entertainment, 3D simulation and animation. Some of his clients or customers that he's worked with in the Iraq music industry: Ozzy Osbourne, movie directors James Cameron, Brian De Palma, Cindy Pollock. Richard, it's an honor to have you here. I'm excited to hear about artificial intelligence, and what you're saying to me last night is this is not the future, this is now.
Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Good one. Thank you, Keith. Thanks for setting the table for me there. At the luau last night, people kept coming up to me saying, hey, I heard about you. You're that guy. You're that weird futurist guy. And I said, first of all, no, I'm not, but what? I guess I used to be a futurist, and then history caught up with me, so now I like to say I'm a nowist. So we're going to talk about some weird, exciting, maybe even scary, frightening technologies in the next 50 minutes I have with you, but it's all going to be about now. I want all of you to be able to go back to your organizations, back to your families, and for yourself with some new information, hopefully, that will change the trajectory of your lives and of your companies. And I know it says future up there. It's not that I don't want to be part of the future. I desperately do, like I hope all of you do. But I want to talk about what we can do today and what's happening today, and even what's happening in the recent past with technology that's going to change this industry. Because as Pete said, we have to be ready for disruption, and disruption, I'm afraid to tell you, is going to be the norm. So this is a little bit about my perspective, what gives me the ability to come down here to Orlando and talk to you guys. I'm not from your industry, although I do know your industry. I've built simulations that I hope are back there with Sun and some of you guys that are VR simulations of some of the systems you've built. But my background is computer gaming and that sort of thing over the last 30 years. As Keith said, I've built game companies with people like Tom Clancy and Michael Crichton and Ozzy Osbourne and science fiction writer Douglas Adams. Only one of those people is still alive. I don't know what to think of that. I'll let you draw your own conclusions about how to live your lives. But I try not to think about it. And I've worked in aerospace, so right down the street here, a division of Lockheed Martin bought my company in 2007. So I spent 6 years working in AI, VR, AR, augmented reality, and machine learning. And that's some of the stuff I want to talk to you about because it is affecting your industry. And I know you guys already get automation, right? You're already doing physical, industrial automation. You understand that. But there's more happening, and I want to make sure that, and that's what Tappy asked me to do for you today, is make sure you're aware of what's actually happening there and scare you just a little bit. I promise not too much. And if we run out of stuff to talk about in the next 50 minutes, I will be back again tomorrow morning because I heard there was an AI panel led by Chris Harris. Where's Chris? Raise your hand so people can find you if you're here. And I said, hey, can I come to your 7:40 session and scare everybody on Tuesday morning? He thought about it for a second and said, sure, so I'll be doing that. So here's how I want to map it for you. Any chess players out there? Raise your hand if you play chess. So you can map it your own way, but this is how I think about this sort of age that we're in, the information age. right? So in chess, if you know that, there's an opening game, there's a middle game, there's an end game. I believe right now we're in the middle game, the most interesting part of the chess match. In fact, there's as many positions in the middle game as there are stars in our galaxy, just to put it in perspective. And yet in 1997, a machine beat the #1 chess player in the world, Garry Kasparov, a long time ago, before the turn of the century. But if you think about these three stages, in the first stage, which I just arbitrarily put about 1968 up to 2009, and you'll hear me say 2009 a couple of times, because I think that was really a sort of seismic year for a lot of the stuff we're going to talk about. But back then, we built technologies, and then we adapted ourselves to the stuff that we built. There was a guy named Marshall McLuhan who talked about, in his book, Understanding Media, the things we make us. And that's happening, right? We're building these technologies, and we're sort of losing control of the things that we've built. And they're changing us. They're changing our environment. They're changing us physically. You could draw a lot of conclusions about this pandemic and say a lot of it has to do with the global connections that we've made, a lot of the systems and the transportation and that sort of thing. But I really like where we are now because it's changing. Right now, we're in the age of Siri and of Alexa, right? We're now, instead of us doing the bidding of the computers, right, getting carpal tunnel syndrome and learning to batch code and that sort of thing, we're now walking into a room and say, Siri, Alexa, turn the lights on. What's the sports score? We don't know how to spell, but we produce perfectly spelled documents. We don't know where anything is, but we never get lost. We have cars who drive themselves now. Really interesting time that we're in, but I think we're about to go to that next phase. And this is the last one here where we talk about the singularity. Have you guys heard of this idea of the singularity? Raise your hand if you know what that is. Any idea? Oh, okay. Well, this ought to be fun then. So if you know physics, the idea of a black hole is the singularity is that point at which light and matter and everything is consumed, and we can't even with our best telescopes, we don't know what's on the other side of it. We can't see because it's so weird and strange and different over there. That's where we're headed with technology. So this science fiction writer named Vernor Vinge wrote about this many years ago, but he calls it that point at which we create computer systems that exceed the ability of the human brain, or the capacity, or the compute power. How many of you, well, I'll just tell you, we've already done this. So we have computers out there, especially on the supercomputer side, that are more powerful than the human brain. There's a guy named Ray Kurzweil who says, that and there's, I don't know if you can see that little graph there, but in 2023 now, which is only 2 years away, $1,000 should buy you more compute power than the human brain. And very shortly after that, we'll have systems that are more powerful than all human brains on the planet. And this is the power of exponentials, right, of Moore's law. You guys know Moore's law? I mean, you deal with it in manufacturing. You're seeing price performance double about every, 18 months? And again, that's been happening since 1968. And it's showing no sign of stopping, even though people keep saying, Moore's law is going to be over soon. And I'll just give you one example of that. We mentioned some of the stuff I've done in the film industry. So there in 2009 on the set of Avatar, that's me with James Cameron with his really cool, stereoscopic 3D camera. And you can see this big hulking that he built that he invented with Vince Pace, who's standing with me there. That's what it looked like in 2009. And Jim and I go way back to, we worked on a couple of different things together. I was on the board of a school that he started out in Calabasas, California. But the camera that he's using today looks like the one below. So this is more familiar to you probably in manufacturing, is how powerful machines get smaller and smaller, right? Especially if they have any kind of computing in it. Now, the only reason the camera is even that big is because there are some physical constraints around the lens. But this shows what Moore's law looks like. And I don't know how many mathematicians we have out there, but if you take 2009 to 2021, what is that, 12 years? Gosh, how many turns of Moore's law is that if it's every 18 months? What is that? Check my math, 2 to the 7th, 2 to the 8th. So that means that in this short amount of time, which doesn't feel that long to me, the compute power of that system and of all of our systems has improved. It hasn't doubled. It hasn't just increased 10 times, but something like 256 times or 512 times. And a year and a half from now, it's going to be 1,000 times more powerful for the same amount of money. That's the age that we live in, and if you're not thinking about that frequently, you're going to get left behind, and that's what I want to kind of warn you about. But this is what I want to talk about today, is these three ideas. And like I said, you guys already get industrial automation. I want to talk about automating decisions, or the cognitive stuff that is part of all the business that we do. And then this last one I've become really interested in recently, and it's this idea of, and I see a lot of gray heads out there. I mean, I see the full spectrum of people out here represented, you know, Generation X, Y, Z, millennials, and baby boomers like me. I'm the last of the baby boomers, by the way. And when I was at Lockheed, we called this problem the Silver Tsunami, right? It's the people that know how the rockets work, how the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter works. And these people start retiring, and they haven't passed that wisdom and knowledge on. So a lot of investment of our tax dollars and even at Lockheed Martin has been made into these capabilities, this knowledge. And when these people retire, that knowledge goes with them. We're thinking about this a lot, of course, in the military right now, and I'm helping with that as well, where we've got people who have this rich, deep, and unfortunate experience in Afghanistan and Kuwait and Iraq. And they're coming back, and now they're retiring. Like, what about all this knowledge they've gained? How do we capture that, put it into simulations, or even simulated people? And again, I may run out of time to talk about that here today, but we will talk about it tomorrow morning if I run out of time today. So I want to talk about that. So let's bring this back to business. Pete talked a lot about, like, hey, it's about the bottom line. It's about the value creation. So I'm not here just to talk about, hey, look at all these technologies, look how cool and scary they are. Let's talk about what their impact is on your business today, and things that I think you should be paying attention to, just even beyond industrial automation. So a couple of years ago, after I left my ridiculously overpaid job at Lockheed Martin to start my first artificial intelligence company, I got engaged because it was still a little bit early. I was running around to Cisco and JP Morgan and big companies like Lenovo and saying, hey, you need a machine learning strategy. And they said, machine learning, what's that? I'm like, you're a computer company. Really, you don't know machine learning yet? But I did this sort of workshop at JP Morgan, and we, you know, up on Wall Street, if you know JP Morgan, one of the biggest, they'll tell you how big they are. That's the first 30 minutes of every one of their speeches is always about how big they are, how important they are. But we went through a list of things that they were doing and came up with a lot of different ways we could apply machine learning. But this one ended up being a Harvard Business research study. They were spending 360,000 hours a year just reviewing loan agreements, right? And it was an understood part of their business. It was built into their stock price. It was built into their P&L. And just like, hey, that's the cost of doing business. And what I want, again, I want you to go back here, from here, thinking about, you know, some of these things you're assuming are a cost of business and it always has to be done that way may not be true now, right? And God forbid that you don't figure it out before your competitors do, or you'll be in the same position that JP Morgan's competitors are today. So I'll just tell you the story really quickly. 360,000 hours a year that they were spending, and they said, hey, we can attack that with machine learning, something that does that analysis without humans having to do it anymore. And I don't know who was doing that work. Let's just assume it's New York lawyers. What do New York lawyers make? $800 an hour? So let's figure that's a 300 mil. I'm just going to round it. I'm not going to do the math live in front of you without a net. But about $300 million a year, right? That's just an assumed cost. So they made a one-time investment, took less than 7 months, cost less than $2 million. Their return that year, $300 million. So I don't have my MBA either, like Pete said. But if I can make a $2 million investment and get a $300 million return that year, I'm going to make that immediately. My God, right? But not only that, you make it that year, and you get that $300 million return every year thereafter. It's an annuity. You can't afford not to do it. So that's why this became a Harvard Business study. and why JP Morgan is furiously going through everything that they do, as I believe you should, in figuring out what should humans be doing and what should we be turning over to machines. And not just the effort, the human effort turned over to machine effort, but the human attention turned over to machine attention, the human analysis turned over to machine analysis. That is the age we live in now, not in the future. It's happening right now. In fact, this story is about 4 years old now. So if you're a competitor of and I bought stock in them as soon as I saw this, because I'm like, hey, their stock price is going to go up. They need fewer resources than their competitors, and it has been going up. So again, think about this. Here's another just weird little thing from 2011. This had a seismic effect on me because we were looking, I was at Lockheed Martin at the time, we were looking at things like AI and helping government with policy. Now, one of the problems with government, of course, is technology, as we just discussed, is moving at this exponential rate, right? So it's doubling very, very fast. And policy still moves at the old, slow, bureaucratic pace of government. So it's always at least 10 years behind. So here's an example. What you're looking at here is all of the trading indices in the United States and high-frequency trading systems starting in, I think it was about 2007. There was no governance around it. The SEC wasn't looking at it. And you're starting to see the amount of trades happening with automated systems, automated artificial intelligent systems, not humans. Now, why are these systems better? Well, first of all, they don't sleep, they don't eat, they don't need health insurance, just like automation systems don't. And they work at the speed of light. So, and we actually caught these systems, and this is what got our attention at Lockheed. We caught these systems trading with each other in the future. That's what you see at the bottom there. So try to wrap your corrugated minds around that. That's a joke I came up with last night, by the way. It's not really a joke. I don't know if you're hearing this for the first time, but the brain is corrugated. You know, the last time we got an upgrade as humans was the Pleistocene, by my reckoning, and that's when the brain got corrugated so it could fit in, you know, continue to grow but stay inside the brain. So that's a free one you can use at cocktail parties and whatever for the rest of the week. But yeah, we lost control of these systems, and the SEC didn't have any governance around it. And we realized that even if you were a really smart person, you created your own AI high-frequency trading system, that's still not enough because you're dealing with the speed of light. So wherever you're trying to trade, your machine has to be as close as possible physically to the other trading machines. So you can't be in Yonkers trying to trade with the machines on Wall Street. You need to be in the building next door because we're talking about millisecond advantages in trades. Humans, so I fired my financial planner that day. I said, dude, we've been friends since college. I'll keep playing golf with you. You can't help me anymore. This is what's happening today. Being a standalone human being is insufficient, right? This is the world we live in. So finally, and I talked about this in 2013 at a DoD conference I do every year called Mod Sim World. And the very next year is when Michael Lewis came out with this book. And finally, the SEC got around in 2014 to creating some rules and regulations around high-frequency trading. But that's one of the problems we have is technology is moving really, really fast. We humans are losing control of the systems that we're building. We don't even understand how they work in many cases. So that's a little scary, right? And if you don't think we're having that kind of effect, like Marshall McLuhan said, the things we make us. I'll tell you one thing, this is another little cocktail party tidbit. And I saw, again, there's a lot of people, a lot of different age groups here. All of us have one thing in common. When we die, whenever you die, and hopefully it's a long time from now, a coroner will be able to come and figure out the exact time of your death. Why is that? Anybody know? And I'll give you a hint. We weren't able to do it before 1945. So how can we do it now? Because all of us have radiation fallout in our systems because of nuclear testing and nuclear bombs that have been detonated, Chernobyl, Fukushima. It's all in our bodies, and that's how we can tell what time you died. Kind of freaky, right? And we did this ourselves. We humans did this thing with technology, and that's changing us physically. It's changing our evolution. It's changing business. So anyway, back to our program. This is how I got religion on machine learning. So I learned this. I was at Lockheed. I got called out to Microsoft Research Labs. That's Alex Kipman on my right shoulder. On my left shoulder is this weird, cool dude named Jaron Lanier, who came up with the term virtual reality. And they were trying to build this thing called the Microsoft Kinect, which is a system that looks in your living room and where you or your kids' bodies become the controller, right? And we went out there saying, okay, we at Lockheed Martin, maybe we can help you with sensors, right? But I found out that very quickly their sensors were fine. But what blew me away, and again, someone who's been in this industry for a long time, working with AI, I've always thought, yeah, AI, that's what we call stuff that doesn't work yet. The minute it starts working, we call it code. That's all it is. It's finite state machines, it's rules-based engines, it's behavior trees and games. We know how all that stuff works. There's nothing mystical about it. This is mystical. So how many of you are familiar with machine learning? It's hard to see past these lights. Okay, one simple way to think of machine learning is it's just the ability for a computer to learn from experience and improve its judgment, right? So what's different about that, though, is the old way is if you wanted to teach a car how to drive itself, first a human has to understand it. And then we sit down and we render all that into some kind of set of instructions and say, here, car, here's how you drive. What's the problem with that? The problem is we don't know how humans drive cars, much yet be able to actually render that into a program to let the machine drive itself. That's why the early attempts at self-driving cars all failed. But now we have perfectly driving cars because we went to this new thing of like, give the system an example of every possible thing it might encounter. So back then when I worked on this, it took 224,000 hours of compute time to teach a system what a living room was. That sounds crazy, right? But it's millions of examples of what's the difference between an Asian living room and a US living room and a cat and a dog and a chair and a table and a lamp and different people. So how can it recognize me? It sounds trivial to us, but it was hard back in 2009. Today, I can just take 100 hours of driving video and I can teach any car system out there today to drive almost flawlessly, much better than humans can. So just some other quick examples. That's me with Nolan Bushnell. If you guys recognize him, it's at a little Indian restaurant down the street here. And I live in North Carolina, but I come down here frequently for things like this. But we taught a system to play Atari games using this method. So not by programming it to learn to play Atari games, by letting it watch humans play, watch millions of games, and today, the DeepMind system from Google can outperform or can play better than any human on all 57 Atari games. That's kind of weird and cool. But this is the one that really shocked us. And this is one other lesson I want you to think about is experts like me, and I'm considered an expert in AI and gaming and simulation, other experts that I work with, we were all surveyed by MIT back in around 2005. When do you think a system is finally going to beat the #1 Go player in the world? When do you think computers will learn to lie? When do you think, all these different things? And we made all these predictions. We were all wrong. And we didn't get it wrong by a year or two. We got it wrong by decades. That just shows you, because again, even experts, we think in linear terms, and what's happening out there is happening exponentially. So Alphago, by the way, if you're not familiar with this event, it happened in 2016, more than a decade earlier than anybody predicted. That's a game that has, it's not like chess. It has more positions than there are atoms in the universe, right? So that happened in 2016. But this is another thing that really grabbed my attention and should grab yours as well. We kept talking about when would machines be able to lie and really humans, and we thought that would be a long time from now. It might be 2025, 2030. It happened in 2017. So again, a machine learning system could beat all the top Texas Hold'em players in the world and learn to win at things like StarCraft that requires deception and that sort of thing. So that's already happening as well. So it's something we have to be on guard against. But this is the overarching sort of lesson, and we'll get into some like real guidance for you guys, is you should be looking at everything in your organization, figuring out that right balance between humans and machines to optimize outcomes. That's a really simple way to encapsulate it. But I've been even saying, maybe that means there's a new job, right? So there's a job creation opportunity. Let's call it, Chief Resource Officer. who's constantly looking at that question or asking that question. And the issue there is like you can't do it just once a year in an exercise because things are changing so fast. It's almost like a month-to-month operation you need to do. What do we need to do this month? What's changed? You know, like JP Morgan did by looking and saying, hey, we're spending hundreds of thousands of hours over here evaluating this thing. Can we automate that? And if the answer is yes, do it as fast as you can, because not only does it pay off that year, it pays off every year. So that's what I'm interested in doing. So there's been a lot of talk about this, you know, the future of jobs. Let's talk about that just briefly, because that's one of the big concerns, is that machine learning and AI are displacing jobs. And it is happening, but I think we're also creating jobs, as I just gave you an example, but there's more examples. Here's another way to think about it. And I'm a military history major, so I always look back through history to guide my thinking. And you know, one thing that's helpful to think about is, I'll just try to get past all this. I got some of my think tank together, and we looked, this is about 2010, and said, you know, what's happening with this tech? And what do we need to be prepared for? And how do we advise policymakers in DC and elsewhere about this? And we said, hey, prepare for double-digit unemployment. Now, it didn't really happen, though, until 2008 and until, you know, this pandemic, because we are finding other things for people to do, but also prepare for double-digit Dow returns because of that JP Morgan-like effect, right? Where all of a sudden you have these massive amounts of sort of inefficiencies wrung out of the system so that profit margins go up and you can do it with less people, which again is concerning, and prepare for more reliance on government because we're going to have this big unemployment. Now, none of that has necessarily come true. And this is another way to think about it, is we've been through this before. So when the Industrial Revolution started, you know, in 1800, it goes all the way back to the first steam engine, right? 90% of everybody in the United States worked in agriculture. In 1900, it was 41%. Today, it's less than 2%. So we found stuff for people to do, right? We just had 200 years to do it. The only difference now is we probably have a decade. So we got to move faster. We've got to be more agile. We got to think about this. That's why I think people like a chief resource officer in your company is a good idea. We have more app developers than we do farmers in the US now. An app developer as a job didn't exist until 2007. So again, it shows that we can create new jobs. There's been a lot of discussion about this in Davos, World Economic Forum. Most of this is about policy. But again, if it's not already on your radar, think about what this means to your organizations. Organizations like Pete's, I was taking notes there thinking, you know, for that many people, what kind of disruption is he likely to see in the next couple of years as the trends in automation continue, and not just physical automation, but mental automation. And also, you know, what are the concerns about how do we capture and hold and map and route organizational knowledge we've invested in by sending people to conferences like this? They come back with new information. How do we make sure it's preserved and stays in the organization? This is a fun little tidbit, you guys. Normally I would run this video. I didn't know how much time I would have, so I just have the video, this up here, but I can share the video with you later. I did this when I was at Lockheed back in 2012, and I was running around this part of the USA Science Festival talking about some of these future technologies like molecular computing and 3D printing and quantum computing. You know, when I was at Lockheed, we bought the first quantum computer. You want to talk about something weird, and again, someone like me or my team who are very comfortable with all these technologies, we go down, we heard that we just bought the first quantum computer. It was down at a strip mall next to a taco place in Los Angeles because it was near USC, University of Southern California. So I go in there and I'm standing and looking at this machine and we're going like, asking questions, just a big black machine. I'm like, can you put some, you know, lights that blink on it or something, or make it make some noises? Because it just sits there not doing, it looks like it's not doing anything. It looks like the monolith from 2001, A Space Odyssey. But I said, you know, okay, how do you program it? What kind of algorithms do you guys use? Programming languages, how do you program this thing? And the guy goes like, yeah, we don't use algorithms. We use probability envelopes. I don't know if there's any programmers in here. That usually, at hackathons and stuff, that usually freaks everybody out. It's like, no, we don't use algorithms. We use probability envelopes. And I had to get a chair sit down and kind of stare at the ceiling for a minute. And I'm like, look, if you're going to tell people stuff like that, you should put a fainting couch here or something so we could just ponder, like, what the heck did you just say? Like, how do you program something that is in this quantum universe where it's about the spin of electrons and no longer about silicon? But that has also come a long way since 2009. But anyway, in this Factory of the Future, by the way, the joke is, you'll see that there's one person in there in this little simulation, and that's my avatar again. My daughter calls it Monster Daddy because she doesn't like the way the hands move. They're wrong. But I have this animated video of the Factory of the Future that has all these technologies in it, and it has one person, and it has a dog. You can't see the dog in there. But the man's job is to feed the dog, and the dog is there to bite the man if he ever touches any of the automation. So that's the kind of thing we're using to build things like F-35 and new technologies at Lockheed. But this is, again, the thing we have to be thinking about, that the age-old battle for centuries has been between capital and labor, right? That's what we've argued about forever. And because of automation, and not just physical automation, but also cognitive automation, that battle is really shifting towards capital. Because if you can buy the machines or rent the machines, that's the new cost of doing that. And you don't need to pay for a human to do it. And they've already figured that out in China, by the way. We were looking at this outsourcing problem to China for years and years, but that's changing as they start building their little robot armies, right? And I don't think they really thought through the issue there is, you know, Foxconn was building all the iPads and iPhones over there, but once we get to where we're fully automated in this capability, well, we can just make iPhones and iPads in Modesto now, right? With robotic systems that don't need insurance and don't ever call in sick, and so we won't be outsourcing to China anymore for any of this stuff. And you know, there's people already talking about that in the halls of power in DC. And by the way, I should say I'm also with the Atlantic Council, the Geotech Center. If you guys haven't heard about that, it's a relatively new think tank where we're trying to think about, you know, going back to Pete's comments about ethics, how do we ethically apply these technologies in ways that make the world better and think through the implications of the technologies we're building. But how do we actually solve problems like this with policy? And again, that's what it comes down to. Whether everyone thinks they're safe, but you know, librarians, I'm there at NC State's library where a robot, you come in and tell the system what book you want, and this robot goes and finds the book and brings it to you and deposits it in a little bin. There's no librarian there anymore. That was a postmodern moment for me. And then a couple of years ago, I was asked to come, that's a little thing in USA Today, where I'm sitting next to Alan Kay. Do you guys know who Alan is? So Alan's the guy at Xerox PARC who invented the Windows interface that we still have today, the mouse, the laptop computer, object-oriented programming. I mean, he's my idol. He's still alive, still going strong. I've worked with him on a couple of things, but it's me, him. That's Michael Jones from Google Earth. So we did this war game. It was red team, you know, blue team, if any of you are ex-military, at the Pentagon, and it was about the force of the future. So the DoD force of the future. So we had this 3-day exercise of how do we recruit, train, and field the force of the future. And our red team response was, hey, because of all these technologies, we really only need about 20% of the fighting force we have today in terms of human personnel, but they're going to have 20 times the strike capacity. So what does that mean? Well, it means we got to hire them, recruit them, and train them differently, and invest in them. So instead of, you know, the grunt that we pull out of the tobacco fields in North Carolina and send to Afghanistan, it's going to be people we train more like pilots. So if you've ever known pilots, I mean, they get in. My dad was an Air Force pilot, flew F-4s in Vietnam, and they invest heavily. We have to invest heavily in pilots. Right? The best medical insurance, the best training, everything. They've got to think of themselves as demigods because you're giving them this, like all the powers of hell, this $100 million aircraft or whatever it is. And they got to be confident, they got to be well trained, their mental skills, their emotional state has to be solid because of what you're giving them. And that's how we have to build the force of the future. I'm not saying that necessarily applies to your business, but it is something to think about. But this is the kind of things that we're building. There I am with the head of NATO, General Weiss, Frank DiGiovanni, who's the Undersecretary of Defense for Training, Readiness, and Strategy. We're building this thing called Target PAL, which basically is this thing where you've got a forward observer, and they're able to bring in like, hey, should I drop a cruise missile here or bring drones in or whatever? And they don't have to say, well, where's the enemy, and let me try to plink at them. They can say, well, there's 137 things this person might do next, my enemy. Let's just fire on all the possibilities. That changes the nature of the problem, doesn't it? If you have those kinds of resources, those kinds of capabilities. And again, this is the idea, it's about balance, right? What's the right balance for your industry, for your job? I was sitting at the table there with Keith's daughter, and we were talking about nursing. You know, I spent about 8 years exactly, on the board of trustees of a big community college in North Carolina with 70,000 students. And, you know, I was a troublemaker because I kept hearing about, oh yeah, we're teaching radiology over here. And I'm like, oh no, that's already happened, where machines are now an order of magnitude better at humans. Like, that's not a job anymore. Why are we teaching that? And they're like, no, you don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, we'll get jobs for these people. And I would actually go there and say, you can try to talk to the students and like consider other avenues. Just like I tell my kids. I mean, we are at that point. When you have a machine that can do something 10 times better than you can already, that's not going to be a job very long. And again, the answer to that question is changing pretty rapidly. So just some final thoughts here on, I want to hear your questions and how much I've scared and upset or made anybody angry. But this is, again, how I think about it. I think about this first phase of the information age where we couldn't do anything until we humans have to understand it first, and we can sit down and tell a computer how to do it. Now we're in this middle stage where it's about, give me lots and lots of examples, and I can train a system how to drive a car or how to automate a factory or whatever it is. This last one I'm really interested in is how do we preserve knowledge? How do I model people? Even in this last year, my team won, actually we were finalists, I shouldn't say we won yet, but is for the Pandemic Response Challenge X Prize. If you've heard about the X Prize, that's Elon Musk and Peter Diamandis and all that. They put on this X Prize for how do you build technologies with machine learning and AI that can help us combat this system and predict better. And most of the systems out there were just predicting infection rates and things like that using the old models. We came in with like, no, I'm going to model the population of everybody in the United States. And let's model what they're thinking, what their values, traditions, and ideas are. Let's put them into a simulation and let's test ideas. And that comes out predicting much better about what's going to happen in King County in the state of Washington versus Wake County in North Carolina. And that's what advanced us. So I think that's where we're headed next. It's getting really interesting and weird really fast. So let's talk about preserving people. You know, I was taking notes when Pete was talking about culture. I think there's a huge opportunity to do that with these technologies in your company for culture. So first you gotta, like he has decided, like this is our culture, these are our values, right? So how do you figure out like, are people in your company across all 16,000 employees, are they all really adhering to these values? What is our culture? Well, what if you could take the data exhaust from people, which is what we're doing, and model them, and then see how do they fit next to the culture that we have? And how do I move them to where I want them to be? So hold on to that thought for a second. But I've been able for a long time to actually take data, like I did Victor Hugo first because he had a lot of free public data out there, had my machine learning brain read everything he's ever written, everything written about him, and I stood up a resurrected model of Victor Hugo. That the first couple of days, we could just release him on the net and see like, what does he think about the news? So he's reading the news, he's watching YouTube videos, he's listening to podcasts. This is in 2017, and I can go and visit Victor every day and say, what is he thinking? What's he looking at? And it was weird and cool, and we got written up in a couple of magazines. I could do it with George Washington, Martin Luther King, anybody who I can get enough data on. Because again, it's about lots and lots of data. I can model people, and it's not just an interest graph and a sentiment model, it's also behaviors, right? So 2 years ago, I went and spoke at a Comic-Con in Seattle, and Stan Lee had just died, and I thought, well, I bet I can model Stan because Stan's a public figure. There's lots of data around him because he's done lots of interviews in print, on the radio, and in television. So I modeled him, and I let the audience actually talk to him so they could ask him questions. Who would win in a battle between Hulk and Thor? and he would answer the way he's answered it before. And also I can look at things like, if he were here right now in Orlando, what would Stan say? What would he think? What would he be eating and drinking today? Right? So this is getting weird, right? But all of us are leaving data exhaust behind. You know, how many of you have cell phones with you right now? How many of you have turned off location services completely? None of you, I bet. Not one of you, right? So using that data, which is really freely available, easy to get, I can tell how long you people slept last night, where you went, where you ate, where you drank. I know everything about you. I have these rich patterns of life that I can then put into simulations, which then, yeah, and we work with Nielsen and we work with Procter & Gamble and all this. And it's not the best use of the technology from my perspective, but it's paying the bills. And we're doing it in a way that is protective of privacy and that sort of thing. I'm just telling you that this, if you didn't know this genie's already out of the box, it is. And then 3 years ago, or 4 now, gosh, it's been 4, my dad died. I don't know how you feel about this, but of course I'm a technologist, and it only took me like a week before I said, okay, what if I could keep my dad around a little bit longer? And the problem with my dad is he had a really rich life. He did a lot of things. He won 2 Air Force Commendation Medals. He saved 8,000 Cambodians when we weren't supposed to be in Cambodia under enemy assault during a monsoon, organized an airlift for him, got a commendation medal, and got a commendation medal from Vietnam, which he had to get congressional approval for. But he wasn't on Facebook. He wasn't on LinkedIn. He didn't have a rich sort of Google footprint. So I had to take like scanned in military records and letters and things like you might hear Ray Kurzweil talking about trying to do with his dad. So it isn't, this idea didn't generate with me or originate with me, but I did it. And I'm able to stand up my dad. I can go visit him today and see what does he think, just like Victor Hugo. What does he think about what's going on in the world? I didn't always agree with my dad about everything. I almost feel like I'm arguing with him sometimes. But I've got this model of him, of his view of the world. And if I had a richer data source, like I could have, like we're trying to do in the military, it could be like a model of what he actually did when he was in Vietnam. When he encountered certain situations, how did he process it? What resources did he go to? How did he think about the problem and how did he solve it? If all that was in this model of him, I could use that to train the next generation of soldiers. Just like you guys could use something like that to train the next generation of people in your organizations. Because some of you, I can see the gray hairs, you guys start retiring, you're taking with you in a massive amount of information and knowledge and wisdom. And I hope you'll be more like Pete and mentor and teach and keep doing that. But if you're not, then we've lost a lot. I really do think, and I think now we've got the ability to save some of it. So what am I talking about in the end? Like, there's been a lot of stuff with comic books and stuff recently. My favorite superhero is Batman. Now, what's Batman's superpower? Anyone? Well, he's rich. Yeah, so he's rich. Is that a power? I don't know. But his real power is just that he can use technology. That's his real superpower, right? That's how he beats all the criminals out there, is he knows how to use technology. So try to think about taking a lot of the stuff I talked about here, stuff I'll talk about tomorrow morning at 7:45 for any of you who can get up and be there and get scared with me. We'll talk about how you actually apply these technologies to become more like Bruce Wayne. And there's a list of books here. I'll make sure anybody who wants it can read. I'm still a big reader, even though I'm a technologist. I read long form stuff all the time. There's lots of new ideas coming out there, being released all the time. And I'll just share one last idea with you, and then I want to take questions from you. The other great thing about machine learning is its ability to solve problems in new ways. So having a machine learning system as a component of your organization, the way JP Morgan now has many, by the way. A lot of banks, for some reason, are the ones that have adopted this really quickly, and even schools and others. But there's this other idea of remember I said at the beginning, perspective is worth 80 IQ points? How about having a super-powered machine learning AI perspective in your organization that's looking at problems in ways that maybe humans haven't even dreamt up? Because even if you have 16,000 people or 130,000 like we had at Lockheed, that's not necessarily enough people to dream up all the questions to ask about the problems you're admiring. So what we have with machine learning is you just dump all the information in there and say, system, or whatever you want to call your thing, Alfred, come up with every hypothesis you think might be useful to me this year, and tell me what I should be paying attention to. That's the thing I want to give to Pete and people like him, and to our world leaders and others, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow, is this, I call it the new scientific method. Because the old one was, humans come up with an hypothesis, you design some experiments, and you might do 3 or 4 or 5. With machine learning, you dump all the data in there and say, come up with every hypothesis you think might be useful, and usually you find some weird stuff, and you just tell this, the human then says, that's not useful, that's weird, that's crazy, oh, that's interesting, go look at that, go design experiments around it, and do them. And when it does those experiments around that data, it doesn't do 3 or 4 or 5 or 8, it does 10 to the 8th. And then you can see the Monte Carlo distribution of potential outcomes and decide what it is you're going to do. And again, we're doing this in the military already. If you want to do it in your organization, it's available. Here's one example, and I don't know if in the back there if you can play that little video at the bottom, but we had a problem that I was given, which is the helmet for the F-35. Those of you who are in manufacturing and stuff might appreciate this, industrial design. So we have this helmet where you can actually, it's got all the sensor data in it, and it actually becomes something like the Wonder Woman plane, right? So when you're flying an F-35, if you're a US pilot, the other guys don't get this capability, you actually get to the point where the aircraft becomes transparent, and you're seeing the sensor data. So you can look right through it, you can look at the ground, you can look at sensor data laid over targets and that kind of thing. And we had to come up with a way, how do you do that with a 160-degree field of view? And we went to all the big optics manufacturers, I won't mention them, the glass manufacturers, and they're like, it's impossible, it can't be done. We turned the problem over to an AI system. It designed it in short order. And of course, we figured out you can't do it with glass, but the machine doesn't even know, we didn't give it that constraint. So it came up with like, oh, the properties you need are in something called a Fresnel lens, which is in lighthouses, and it's made of plastic, and you put 4 or 5 layers of that together, you get the molded shape that you need, and you get your 160-degree field of view and your high-fidelity visual system. The humans didn't solve that problem, a machine did, because it has a weird perspective and doesn't know. So anyway, that's what I'll leave you with. I appreciate the time, and I'm really looking forward to questions, and I'm also open to answers if you have any of the questions I pose. Thank you.
Thanks for that talk. My name is Alex Latic. I'm with EFI. We're an actual software company serving the packaging and corrugated industries. My question to you from this inspiring presentation, and by the way, I did read Singularity, and I don't know if I'm sleeping better since I read that, but take it as you can. How do we help our customers, who some of them, might be $20 million a year companies, some of them might be 100 million, definitely not the likes of JP Morgan, and definitely our software budgets aren't what Lockheed Martin might have. Where do we get started? Do we turn to platforms like Watson to solve 2 specific problems? Scheduling and making sure that raw materials get in and they get the maximum machine uptime, both on corrugators and converting machines. And not being dependent on labor, because it's really hard for our customers to get people to come to their plant. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And I think the good answer to that and the good opportunity is that these technologies are commoditizing really fast. So the kinds of things like JP Morgan did that cost them $2 million, you could do for 5, maybe low 6 figures today pretty easily, and have your own machine learning IBM Watson that's tuned to your problem under your control inside your firewall. And it may, I think it's going to get cheaper and cheaper. But that process automation stuff, I've built a bunch of systems for accounting industries that, I don't even think we're going to need accountants, by the way, soon, because I've built systems, or the lawyers, that can look through all of the books, all the sales agreements that a company has. We did it for a company called Cherry Beckert out of Richmond, very affordable, and can trained on their business rules and their analysis, the analysis that their people had done. It can look through all that and actually write the SAS 115 letter, whatever it's called, for the audit itself before humans even get involved. And when I talked about this at a conference in Atlanta years ago, some of the younger people were like, hey, what you're saying is scaring me because it means we're not going to need accounting. At least we won't wait till the end of the year and then do accounting where the accountants come in and just sample stuff like we did with Enron, where we missed a lot of stuff, right? Instead, it's going to be real time all the time, and you're going to absolutely evaluate everything. There's no reason not to because the technology can do it. So, and also, the other thing I would say about smaller companies is I do think it's getting affordable. And the other caution I would say is machine learning is two things, intimate and powerful, meaning that I would not go implement something as a software as a service where I'm giving my data to IBM or to Microsoft or to Google or anybody else. I would want it, if you can afford it, you want one of these systems inside your firewall, under your control, transparent to your inquiry, so you know how it's making its judgments. And it's trained on your data and your processes. I know it's a big lift. It sounds like a big lift, but I've seen that being done for companies that are that are not nine-figure companies. So I think, and it'll continue to get more affordable. But bear that in mind. It's different from other kinds of ERP systems we built before, and that intimacy and power, meaning that it works best when you give it all of your data. So I'm doing it for, I've tied all 58 community colleges in North Carolina together with this one brain that understands all their organizational knowledge, can make recommendations of anytime someone sits down and tries to do something like create a new curriculum around 3D printing or whatever, it goes and reaches out across all those colleges and pulls those people and capabilities together so you don't get redundant information work, but it's inside their system. All right, more questions?
Yes, sir.
You have up your sleeve or in your back pocket to thwart hackers.
To thwart hackers? Yeah, I mean, that's one thing I want to talk about tomorrow. I don't want to steal too much of my thunder for tomorrow, but I've been on a couple of information warfare panels, and that's one of the things we think about a lot at the Atlantic Council as well. But, if you think about our ability to model people and even simulate them to the point where it's hard to tell if you're actually dealing with a real person or not, and you've already seen some of the deep fake stuff, probably with video and imagery, that ship's already sailed. So how do you figure out what's true and what isn't? And I think we can actually do it with the same technology that we're building, which is there are such things as truth algorithms that can look at something and say, how likely is this thing to be true? Did it originate in the right place? Or is this activity that's coming into, and at Lockheed, we were getting hacked every single day. It was like a huge problem, right? You can imagine what a target we were. So that was one of the early applications of both quantum computing. Hopefully I'm not violating my PIRA signatures here, but using those technologies like quantum computing and machine learning and AI is helping combat in real time those kinds of attacks. Now, how do you do that if you're a small company? I don't know, but I would look at companies like CrowdStrike, I think, and Nomadics is another company that I've looked at that have technologies that can help especially medium-sized companies avoid cyber. Now, one of the problems with security today is I can prevent you from machine attacks. I can safeguard you from those. I can't safeguard you from the person who's at a conference like this who gets a thumb drive and then walks back to their computer at home and sticks it in there. That's a really hard thing to find. Those phishing attacks, those social engineering attacks, we got hit by those all the time at Lockheed, and you got to do training and tell people don't do that. And then, build systems that can recognize it. But cyber is a huge problem. I'm working in that field also, and yeah, it's moving really fast. But it's like any kind of technology where every time we come up with countermeasures, the enemy's out there, come out with new ways to attack. And of course, we can be right 99% of the time. The enemy only has to be right once, right? It's one of those problems.
Richard.
All right, what else we have?
Right here. To your right.
Yeah, these lights are so bright.
Yes. Lights are bright. Every time there's technology change, even back before the Luddites, the scare is, well, what's going to happen with all the jobs? And so what makes people think that it's going to be different now? I understand it's going to be faster, but we always seem to find a way for everybody to have work, even as technology increases.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was getting at is we can come up with new jobs, and we have been. There are jobs that now that did not exist, like I said, 10, 12 years ago. And even today, like I'll use the example of drones, right, which I was familiar with at Lockheed. You would think like, okay, we're taking pilots out of aircraft and now we're flying these drones. So we just got rid of a pilot's job, right? Well, we just replaced that pilot with 130 new jobs, which is now managing a whole bunch of drones out there all the time and shifts people that are maintaining those systems and flying them. So we just created a whole bunch of new jobs around that automated, those automated surveillance and weapons systems. So that's maybe not a great example, but I do believe we are going to create new kinds of jobs. But we need a workforce, and that's one of the reasons why I got involved. I lobbied my governor to join the board of, I got appointed first by a Democratic governor and then reappointed by a Republican one. So that shows you I can be diplomatic and cross the aisle on both sides. But I said, community colleges are the right kind of model. The four-year university might not necessarily be it unless they change, where you can go in there and I can take a year and get an associate's degree in something new that didn't exist even as a job. So we're doing that a lot with machine learning and data analysis and things like that weren't really already in the four-year universities yet. But a willingness of people, like Alvin Toffler said, the illiterate of this century are not people who can't read and write, but people who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn fast enough. So we need to be that as individuals. We need to be that as organizations, because disruption, as I said earlier, is the norm. And I do think we're gonna have lots of opportunities for people to work. There's lots of unfilled jobs out there, but a lot of them require new skills that not necessarily we have enough people that are trained to do them. But I'm optimistic about it long term. I'll just say that. Until the singularity, at which point we don't know. In 2025, don't make any plans beyond 2025. But be ready to pivot. Let's put it that way. All right, what else you guys got? Yes.
So the challenge becomes when you try to innovate or change a process. When you try to change a process, you have 5 generations in the workforce. And you have people that don't even know how to use an email, and young kids who come in and are far beyond what we are capable of. How do you deal with those challenges at the box plant level?
Oh, I mean, I think that's universally true just of anything anytime you implement one of these systems like I'm talking about, you have to think about the culture change, the process change, and dedicate some time and energy to it. You can't just implement it and say, all right, everybody deal with it and adjust. I mean, some thoughtful way to guide your people. Don't forget the people and guide them through that process. That's critical. And that's a new kind of job too, right, is change management. So you need your chief resource officer, that's a new job. You need your change management officer, which is probably an HR or something that helps people see what those changes are. Hopefully that answered your question. Yeah, those soft skills, we need them more than ever, I think. All right, I got music, light jazz playing up here. I guess that means they're playing me off the stage, but I appreciate the time, guys, and please, if you want to talk more, come by the 7:45 tomorrow. Or is there another question?
Can you explain more about quantum computing and where we're at with that?
Yeah, well, quantum computing is something I've admired at a distance. Some of my engineers, I have one of my, Lockheed bought my little weird gaming company with, we have like tattoos and those, I had some guys with those like, pierced things in the eyebrow, all that, no shoes. It was a weird sort of impedance mismatch with my people and the honest-to-God rocket scientists at Lockheed, but we made it work. But one of my guys was Technologist of the Year in our second year there, which I'm really proud of because, we came from this gaming industry. There were people there who were like, why did we buy this company? But then we come in, and one of my guys became the fastest person to senior fellow at Lockheed in its 100-year history, and another one got Technologist of the Year. But those guys would be better equipped to answer that than I am. But at the time when I looked at it and when we first bought that system, it was doing what we call quantum annealing. But the idea is instead of there just being a logic gate of a 0 and a 1, a yes or a no, you can have many, many states at once. So it's the rotating position of the I guess the electrons in it. So you can have more states than one at any given time. So it can do more operations simultaneously. So at the time, I think we had 4 qubits. And today, it's, again, I think it's called Rose's Law. I can't believe that just popped into my head. That's cool. Which is the speed at which quantum computing is advancing. And it's doubling about every 2 years. So I think we're now at 32. Maybe we're even at 64 qubits now. And that's a lot of power. But today, it's for very specialized sorts of applications like predicting the weather. So weather prediction should be getting better because of quantum computing. It's, like I said, being used heavily in cyber. We're going to get to a point soon where nothing can be encrypted that can't be broken. Something that would take a conventional computer 150 years to crack can be cracked by a quantum computer in, minutes. So it's scary stuff. It's in hopefully the right hands, and we're protecting some of that stuff. But it's also moving on its own little acceleration path and worth keeping an eye on. But as I understand it today, it's only for certain specialized problems where you are dealing with those probability envelopes and that kind of thing, and not very practical for general applications like spreadsheets and simple logic, state machines, that kind of thing. But there's a space race going on there. All right. Well, again, thanks for inviting me down here. I hope this was helpful and enriching to you guys. I look forward to more. I'll be around all week, and I'll be out here tomorrow morning at 7:45. Thank you. Thank you, Keith. Thank you.
Richard, thank you very much. As we were chatting yesterday and parted ways, getting to learn about him a little bit and his biography, I said, is there any one thing that I shouldn't miss that's super important to you? He said, yeah, I'm a dad. So thank you for your humility. Pete, thank you if you're still here. It's been a great session this morning. I think we're wrapping up about 15 or 20 minutes early. They're not going to allow the trade show to open till noon, so I ask that you please mingle, hang around, grab a drink. But I do want to thank every integrated and every independent that has made this trip and brought their people. It's a huge sacrifice for all of us. The associates that are here have made a commitment to this industry. We're committed to you, and thank you for the opportunity to be here this morning.